Whereas if you sit in the CEO's office, you can be in some sense the sociopath, but you can actually be quite nice to your family and so on, and just pretend that those people out there aren't people. The hardest thing of all is when you're the face-to-face manager and you know that they're people. Do you know what I mean? That often produces the... But they're pushed into being it. But the point I wanted to make was they're not doing this because they're bad or they're mean. They're doing this because they have to do something else. I think in there I'm in agreement with you. They're not fixing the problem of climate change, although many of them would like to fix the problem of climate change, because there's some other things that they have to do even worse. So and a very good example of that is Henry Ford IV, I think it was, who became chief executive officer of the Ford Motor Company about 10, 15 years ago, and was a lifelong environmentalist, and decided to transform Ford into an environmental organization. And first he had, in effect, a nervous breakdown and terrible depression, and then the other shareholders got rid of him because it was impossible to do so. It's the logic of what they're involved. I think we're in agreement about what they do, about what it does to... You're looking very questioning.
Well, there are an awful lot of people working in the private sector, and you can think of examples like, I believe recently IKEA have made a pronounced statement that they will be working to the best of their abilities in a sustainable direction. And I read only today that Sainsbury's do have a policy of only dealing in fair trade bananas. Now, whether that means they're bananas or not, I don't know. But you know, there are these little nuggets of evidence that some of them are human.
Yeah.
But I think the basic capitalist management system is pathological.
Yeah, at least bullying people on a simplest level. In order to make people work hard, you have to bully them. Yes, and you have to ignore their other needs. You have to put profits. I agree with you on that. On the working class, aren't we divided? Don't we have different interests? Oh God, yes, absolutely yes. If you think that things can't be changed decisively in favor of people like us, then you defend your corner. I work in a university. A small university, mainly teaching humanities. My colleagues are torn between the hope that we're in somewhat better financial shape than many other universities, so the other universities are going to go to the wall and maybe we'll survive, and a sense of personal outrage about what's being done to learning and education as a whole. I don't mean that we fall into two groups on this. I mean, I'm torn in my head too. We are all torn in our heads. And with climate change, yes, for instance, the campaign against climate change we started in this country in our campaign for 1 million climate jobs. We started with unions like UCU or like the post office who weren't involved one way or the other, or railway unions who would benefit from action over climate change. Starting there, we have got the support now of Unite for 1 million climate jobs, which is the largest industrial union. And we got it in a unanimous vote. But it didn't start there, because a lot of people were stuck in defending their jobs. I'm much involved with transport unions in different countries. With transport unions, you get a constant tension between... There will be if in a low-carbon economy, there'll be enormously more jobs for railway workers, and there'll be enormously more jobs for drivers of all sorts. Maybe less jobs on trucks, but enormously more jobs on buses and so on. More jobs for drivers, more jobs for mechanics, less jobs in aviation. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of people in aviation, they really like their jobs. and so they're torn. It's not if that's the importance, it seems to me, of arguing for 1 million climate jobs like the campaign we have here. There's a similar campaign now in South Africa, which has broader support and is bigger than the campaign we have here. But it's in South Africa, there are a lot of people who are backing this campaign who come from the enormous users of energy, of coal energy in South Africa, from the Mine Workers Union, from the Metal Workers Union, and so on. These people are principled, but again, there's a conflict inside their heads, quite understandably. And it's only if we say a massive expanse in jobs, and we have to say, that's why we say in the million climate jobs thing, why we say this will only work if we say that this is a public sector job. All the new jobs are public sector jobs. We're saying that not because everything should be public sector. We're saying it because it's the only way that the government can guarantee that every single person who loses a job in the mines or whatever, in aviation, gets another job they want. That's the only way. So the divisions are real there. I don't think the divisions are the same between countries. And here I think there's a couple of things that people say all the time that aren't true. One of them is that it's going to hit the poorest countries and the poorest hardest. That's sort of true. But don't for a moment lose track of how it's going to hit the people in the middle and the people in the richest countries. We thought that the first places to be lost to climate change would be the coral atolls in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean. In fact, New Orleans and southern Louisiana is going first. And it's gone after Hurricane Katrina because after Hurricane Katrina, the United States Army Corps of Engineers decided not to rebuild the levees to a level to withstand even a Category 4 hurricane. And a Category 5 hurricane is coming. And with climate change, it'll be Category 6 and 7. They decided that because they knew that climate change was coming. They decided it wouldn't be worth it. So when the next hurricane hits New Orleans, it will go underwater. Now, also though, if you looked at the pictures coming out of New Orleans, what you saw for the people left in New Orleans in that hurricane, which was in part a climate change hurricane, what you saw was mostly black working class people. That's because New Orleans working class was majority black. And they were poor people because the people who couldn't leave town when the hurricane came were the people without, the quarter of the population without cars, but also the people who were unemployed or on benefits who were waiting for their check, which was coming at the end of the month 2 days later. And therefore couldn't buy a hamburger if they tried to evacuate. Now, of those people, it's not quite the poorest who go first in a climate catastrophe. It's the disabled and the elderly. It's the people who cannot run. These are likely to be among the poorest. But also, I will come back to what you want to ask, but also, if you look at New Orleans, if you go south from New Orleans, in what's predominantly white and working class area, rural but industrial, oil industry, nobody has a house there any longer. That's the first thing. The second thing is when people came back, it wasn't just the poor. When people came back into New Orleans, they discovered that their houses were destroyed or wrecked and that the insurance companies wouldn't pay the insurance. The insurance companies said, this is flood, it's not covered. You have storm insurance. The storm stopped several hours before the flood got to you. And so we won't cover it. And critically, the federal government and the federal courts backed this interpretation. As they will wherever. They cannot pay out on that scale. They would do the same here. And that means that people weren't able to rebuild their houses. Because most of the time they also can't get insurance to rebuild. So that means that about a quarter of people from New Orleans, the population's fallen by about a quarter, but it's fallen by more, because some of those are kind of incoming young professional white people from the north, and a lot of black working class people couldn't come back because they couldn't get the houses. It's the people in the middle of society who suffer as well as the poor. But it's also it's also going to be people in rich industrialized countries in two ways. One is that certain places are particularly vulnerable. The most vulnerable places most vulnerable, big, important places to climate change disasters in the medium term are Shanghai, the Mekong Delta, Bangladesh, Calcutta, the Netherlands, Belgium. London is not as vulnerable as, say, the Netherlands or New York or New Orleans or the delta of the Amazon or Alexandria. Those are the places liable to face catastrophe first, but also London. What's the elevation here? 25 meters? Okay.
It can't be island,
with a hurricane surge, hurricane surges are waves that come like tsunami. They're like tsunamis, but they're created by hurricanes. And the one that hit the Louisiana coast with Katrina was good. I think it was 18 feet high, 6 meters high, as it hit the coast. But the other thing, so we'll have an enormous increase in racism to keep people out. And we'll have new kinds of racism. We'll have a lot of racism about Dutch people and Belgians. To justify keeping out those refugees. But also, I lived in Afghanistan for 2 years in the 1970s, and what I saw was an awful lot of people who were suffering desperately, in part, although I didn't understand it, because of climate change, because of a drought in Central Asia that started in the 60s and has continued to this day. What I didn't know was that was going to work its way through to people I knew when I lived in the valleys in South Wales. The valleys in South Wales are an area where very large numbers of people go to Afghanistan each year to kill and be killed. Because that's their job. Do you know what I mean? And you could see it. We will not escape the wars, and we will not escape the consequences of economic collapse. The scale of the destruction of value within the capitalist system if we lose Shanghai and Manhattan. That will ripple through. So it's in terms of those effects on us, it's enormous, and it's not just the poor, and it's not just the people in poor. Everybody says it is, but it isn't.
Can we get another
I'm sorry.
question?
Talking too much. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I really liked your book because I heard you speak at a couple of years ago, and I thought one of the things I liked about it was very clear.
Yes.
And therefore, to me, it could speak to a large range of people. And I'm slightly concerned when you speak because it sounds like, unless you're in the Marxist ghetto, you can't be part of the climate change movement. So let me finish, please. What I feel is that I'm from the working class. Not everybody in this room is from the working class, but I now feel that I am educated and I can no longer, unless you call everybody who works working class, I think having worked for 40 years, that might qualify. But I think I'll pick up Tim's point, I think for me, right, and many like me, these are old labels, and once you start putting the arguments in these terms, a lot of people will be switched off. For example, I was recently at a meeting at City Hall with councillors from all over the country who were involved in fantastic residence community energy schemes, right? So my attitude is, I'm a very happy humanist, but I will march against war with Christians, Muslims, personally, I wish the whole world were atheists, right?
Yes.
But any port in a storm, and I feel when I go to the National Theatre and see Greenland, you know, that again is another forum of interested middle-class people concerned about climate change. We need every friend we've got, is my attitude.
Okay. I said to Pete before this started, I said, maybe I don't want you filming this. And I said it for just that reason, because I thought I would sit down and talk differently from how I maybe want to be seen on the internet, because I agree with you completely about building the largest possible alliance.
Yes.
I agree with you completely about that, and I think, but I do also think that I think that Marxist idea, I think there's a real argument on which I have an opinion, but the two sides, it seems to me, have a great deal to be said for whether Marxism is possible in practice. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The whole socialist communist experience is in some ways a very sad and tragic and horrible one. So whether you can do it, that it seems to me is real, is a very big argument. But about whether Marxism is kind of describing how things are, I think if you describe the world in Marxist terms without using jargon, which is what I tried to do, without using jargon, then very large numbers of people say, yes, that's what I'm dealing with, that's what I'm facing. But I was trying to put it in terms of kind of my intellectual biography and how I got to it. The thing about the working class, I think, I've just come from my union conference. I mean, we're university lecturers. Do you know what I mean? We're the top of my scale, top of the scale I'm on is twice the median income. In this top of the senior lecturer scale is twice the median income. So it's not enormously more, but it is more than the average. And also, certainly the education that you get when you're a university lecturer encourages you to believe that you're one of the elect. Your working life takes that away from you, but you're certainly encouraged to believe it. And I think working, but there we are, we're a union, and we're behaving like a union because we're facing the same thing that other groups of work, same thing you face if you're a cleaner. We're facing it, and I think that workers are people who have to, we're the people who have to sell our labor to live. Either benefits or wages. We've got to have benefits or we've got to have wages or we can't live. And when we get to work, we have to do what we're told. Those things. And I think that's most people.